tell you she never did anything to anyone. You couldn't even get her to say nothing bad. But Rayven was always special to me because she was my only daughter for 7 years. I had 2 boys, and she was the only girl in the middle. So, you know, she just was so special to me because that was my only daughter for 7 years.
This woman was already fighting for her life every single day. Dialysis, kidney failure, 3 kids to raise, alone. And she was doing it. She was showing up for those kids every single day, even when her body was telling her it had nothing left to give. Let me tell you something. The strength that takes, most people will never understand it. But the one thing that finally took her down wasn't her illness. It was someone she knew, someone who had once been close enough to be trusted, someone she had decided she no longer wanted in her life, and who simply refused to accept that. Her name was Rayven Amuan Edwards. She was 34 years old, and by the time the world found out her name, it was already too late. Rayven was a single mother of 3 children living in Washington, D.C., in the Glover Park neighborhood. And when I say she had a full plate, I mean that woman's plate had a plate on top of it. She had been diagnosed with lupus, a disease that had already taken both of her kidneys, both of them, gone. Her body was in a constant state of war with itself, and because of that, she was on dialysis and waiting for a transplant that hadn't come yet. She couldn't work. She physically did not have the energy to hold down a job while managing the kind of medical routine that dialysis demands. You go in multiple times a week, and you sit there for hours while a machine does the job your kidneys are supposed to do. It is exhausting in ways that are hard to put into words, and yet, Rayven never stopped being a mother. Anyways, the people who knew her didn't talk about her illness when they described who she was. They talked about her kindness, her nurturing spirit, the way she was determined to be present for her children no matter what. Family members described her as the kind of person who just didn't have a mean bone in her body. Her own mother, Lucy Edwards, would later say that Rayven never raised her voice. Never. Not at anyone. She was soft-spoken, devoted, and she just wanted peace. That was it. That was all she was asking for. Peace for herself and her children. But peace was the one thing that kept being taken from her. Now, Rayven had 3 children. Her youngest, a 3-year-old boy, had a different father from her 2 older kids. That father was a 35-year-old man named Stefan Marquis Jeter. And this is where the story takes the kind of turn that makes you stop and stare at the ceiling for a minute. By all accounts, the relationship between Rayven and Stefan had run its course. Rayven was done. She wasn't interested in a romantic relationship with this man anymore. She made that clear. What she wanted, and what she tried very hard to make work, was a co-parenting arrangement. Her son needed his father. She understood that. She was willing to make that work. But romantically? That chapter was closed. She had moved on. Oh, so now? Stefan apparently didn't get that memo, or maybe he got it and decided it didn't apply to him. Because what followed was not a man respecting a woman's decision. What followed was a pattern, slow at first, then louder and harder to ignore, of a man who felt like he was owed something, owed access, owed a place in her life that she had already told him he no longer had. His behavior started making the people around Rayven deeply uncomfortable. He began sending threatening messages. We are not talking about angry texts that go too far in the heat of an argument. We are talking about a man actively wishing death on the mother of his child. Think about that for a second. The woman carrying your son's mother in her body. Sorry, the woman who carried your son. And you are sitting somewhere sending her messages wishing she would die. Make it make sense. And it didn't stop there. He kept finding ways to let himself into her space. He had access to her apartment keys at some point. And when that became a problem, the family had to step in and pay to change the locks. And then it happened again. Her mother, Lucy, later recalled the exhaustion of that situation, having to repeatedly pay to secure her daughter's home because this man kept inserting himself back in. This wasn't something that happened once and got resolved. This was ongoing. This was a pattern that had been going on long enough that the people who loved Rayven had been living with a low hum of fear about her safety for quite some time. I've always been worried about Rayven. All of us have, because it's been an ongoing situation. That's her mother. And when a mother says she has always been worried, not recently worried, not worried since a specific incident, but always worried, that tells you everything about the kind of pressure this family was living under. Now here is a detail that will make you sit with it for a while. Rayven's 10-year-old daughter, her child from a previous relationship, had a habit of standing up for her mother. This little girl, 10 years old, had apparently made a practice of stepping in whenever things got tense, defending her mom, being the one who spoke up when maybe the adults in the room didn't feel safe enough to. That child was a protector at 10 years old, and Stefan knew it. We will get to what he did with that information. But before we do, let's sit here for just a second and understand the full weight of what Rayven was managing. She was battling a disease that was actively destroying her body. She was raising 3 kids on her own without the ability to work. She was dependent on dialysis just to stay alive. She was navigating the process of trying to get on a transplant list. And on top of all of that, she was trying to get free from a man who had made it his mission to make sure she never felt safe. Both of her kidneys weren't working. Her mother said that not as a medical update. She said it to make people understand that her daughter was not in a position to just pack up and leave. She wasn't hiding. She wasn't making excuses for staying. She was a woman with a serious illness, limited mobility, limited income, and 3 children, trying every single day to build a wall between herself and a man who kept tearing it down. She had been trying to move. She had been trying to get to a safer place. The family was aware. They were involved. They were doing what they could. But on February 11th, 2026, it wasn't enough. Moving on into what happened that day. And I want you to stay with me for this part, because the details matter. It was a Tuesday afternoon, around 4:39 in the evening. Rayven was at home with her children in her apartment on the 4100 block of W Street, NW. It was a regular February day in DC, the kind where people are just trying to get through the week. Nothing about that afternoon should have ended the way it did. Stefan showed up. Now, what exactly was said between them in that apartment? What started the argument? What words were exchanged? We don't know the full details of that. What we do know is that whatever happened inside those 4 walls escalated. Voices got louder. The tension that had been building for months, all those threatening messages, all those changed locks, all that fear that Rayven's mother had been carrying for so long, it came to a head right there in that apartment with those children present. And then it moved outside. The confrontation spilled out of the apartment and into the doorway area of the building, right there in the open, where neighbors could see, where the outside world could witness what was happening. And it was there, in front of her children, that Stefan Jeter pulled out a gun and shot Rayven Edwards multiple times. She did not survive. Rayven Amuan Edwards, the woman who had been fighting lupus, fighting kidney failure, fighting to stay alive long enough to see her children grow up, was killed right there, outside her own home, in front of her babies. But he wasn't done. Girl, this next part, I need you to really hear this. Remember that 10-year-old daughter, the one who always stood up for her mother, the child who had made it her personal mission to protect Rayven whenever things got tense? Stefan shot her too, a 10-year-old child. He shot her in the arm. Now there is something deeply calculated about that. This was not a stray bullet. This was not the chaos of a moment spinning out of control. People close to the case believe that little girl was targeted specifically because of how often she had defended her mother, because she had a voice, because she used it, and he wanted to silence it. That child was 10 years old. The youngest boy, Rayven's middle child, who was also present, was not physically hurt, but he was there. He saw everything. And there is no version of that child's life where what he witnessed that afternoon does not leave a mark. After the shooting, Stefan did not stay. He did not call for help. He did not check on anyone. He grabbed his 3-year-old son, the little boy he shared with Rayven, put him in his black pickup truck, and drove away from the scene of what he had just done. He left Rayven bleeding outside her apartment building. He left a 10-year-old girl with a gunshot wound. He left a traumatized child standing in the middle of all of it. And he drove away with a toddler, Neighbors who were in the area called 911. Police and emergency services responded to the scene. Rayven was pronounced dead. Her 10-year-old daughter was rushed to the hospital. Her injury was serious but not life-threatening, and she survived. But in the immediate chaos of what had just happened, there was another urgent crisis unfolding at the same time. The 3-year-old was missing. The moment it became clear that Stefan had fled with the toddler, authorities moved fast. An Amber Alert was issued for 3-year-old Million. Yes, that is his name, Million. And the search was on. DC. Police began canvassing for Stefan's black pickup truck. They shared information across jurisdictions because they knew he could be moving. And it did not take long before law enforcement in Prince George's County, Maryland, spotted the vehicle. A pursuit began. The chase crossed back from Maryland into Washington, D.C., and it ended when Stefan crashed near 30th Street and Nash Place SE. When officers reached the vehicle, they found him inside, suffering from what appeared to be a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Stefan Markey Jeter was pronounced dead at the scene. He never spoke to investigators. He never sat across from a detective in an interrogation room. He never had to look Rayven's family in the eye and explain himself. He took the version of events that only he knew, and he left with it. Now, the 3-year-old. Million was not in the truck when it crashed, and for a moment, that created a new layer of fear. Where was this baby? Had he been left somewhere? Was he safe? It turned out that before the pursuit ended, Stefan had dropped his son off with a relative, his own mother, the child's paternal grandmother, in Prince George's County. The little boy was found safe, and I want to be clear about something, because this detail matters. That child being safe was the one thing in this entire story that gave anyone a moment to breathe. One moment. In the middle of all of that devastation, that little boy was okay. But let's be honest about what that moment also meant. Stefan made a deliberate choice to drop that child off before whatever he had planned for himself. He had enough presence of mind in that moment to make sure his son was taken care of. And yet, he could not find that same presence of mind to put the gun down before he ever walked up to Rayven's apartment. So the child he shared with Rayven, he protected. The children he didn't share with her, one is dead alongside her mother. The other is carrying a bullet wound and a trauma that no child should ever have to carry. And the middle child, that little boy who witnessed everything, is somewhere trying to make sense of a world that stopped making sense the moment that gun went off. This is one of the most tragic circumstances I've ever seen. An entire family is destroyed through the acts of an individual. That was a DC police commander speaking at the briefing that followed. And he was right. An entire family. Not just Rayven. Every child in that apartment, every person who loved her, all of them changed forever by one man's decision. There was no arrest. There was no trial. Stefan Jeter died at the crash scene from a self-inflicted gunshot wound, and with him died any chance of courtroom accountability. There would be no charges read aloud, no testimony, no verdict, no sentence. For Rayven's family, that reality landed on top of an already unbearable grief. Not only had they lost her, but they would never get to sit in a courtroom and watch the person responsible face what he had done. They would never get answers on the record. They would never get that particular kind of closure that a trial, however painful, can sometimes offer. What they got instead was a press conference and a death certificate. DC police confirmed Stefan as the suspect, confirmed the self-inflicted wound, and confirmed that the investigation pointed to him as the man who shot Rayven and her daughter. The case was closed in the most hollow way a case can be closed. Not with justice, but with absence. Period. In the days that followed, the Glover Park community came out. Flowers, balloons, candles, prayers. People who knew Rayven and people who had never met her but felt the weight of what happened. They all gathered at the spot where she was taken, and they stood together. Because sometimes a story hits people in a place that goes beyond the headlines. Sometimes a community looks at a woman's life and recognizes something in it. A familiar kind of exhaustion, a familiar kind of fear, a familiar kind of strength that goes completely unseen until it's gone. Rayven's mother, Lucy Edwards, spoke publicly about her daughter in the days after her death. And the way she described Rayven, it wasn't the kind of eulogy that tries to make someone sound perfect. It was the kind that just tells the truth. She called Rayven her best friend. She said her daughter never did anything to anyone, never raised her voice, was kind to people who were not always kind back. Rayven never raised her voice. And then Lucy said something that I think deserves to sit right here, without me adding anything around it. She said it had been a constant struggle, trying to help Rayven get to a place where she would just be okay. Just okay. Not thriving, not living her best life, just okay. Safe, stable, breathing. That was the goal, and it was stolen from her. Rayven's 2 older children, including the 10-year-old who was shot, went to stay with their father after the incident. That little girl, who had recently been diagnosed with autism according to some reports, recovered from her physical injury well enough to attend her mother's vigil. Let that land for a second. This child, still healing from a gunshot wound, showed up to say goodbye to her mother. The 3-year-old Million remained with family on his father's side. A GoFundMe was set up by the family to help cover funeral expenses and support the children going forward. And on March 5th, 2026, Rayven Amuan Edwards was celebrated at her Celebration of Life service at Northwest Community Church in Washington, D.C. A church full of people, flowers, her children somewhere in that room, her mother in the front row, and a woman who should still have been alive, waiting on a kidney transplant, watching her kids grow up, finally getting to just be okay, was instead being buried. Now I want to talk about something before we close out, because this story is not just about Rayven. It is about a pattern that keeps repeating itself and keeps being treated like it is somehow surprising every time it happens. Rayven did what people tell victims to do. She tried to leave. She set boundaries. She told him the relationship was over. Her family was aware of the danger. The locks were changed. The threats were documented, at least within the family. She was not silent. She was not pretending everything was fine. The people around her knew, and still, it was not enough to stop what happened. But hey, I also want to be careful here, because the conversation around why victims stay or don't move fast enough often puts the responsibility on the wrong person. Rayven was dealing with lupus, kidney failure, 3 children, no income, limited ability to physically relocate at the pace that the danger required. The barriers between a person and safety are sometimes so large and so stacked on top of each other that the decision to stay is not really a decision at all. It is a circumstance. Like, we have to stop asking why she didn't leave faster and start asking why he felt entitled enough to stay, because that is the real question, not what Rayven did or didn't do. But what makes a man decide that a woman's no is something that does not apply to him? What makes a man escalate from threats to a gun in front of children? What makes a man shoot a 10-year-old girl because she had the nerve to defend her mother? Those are the questions that need answers. And until we start demanding those answers loudly and consistently, stories like Rayven's are going to keep happening. Different names, same pattern, same heartbreak, same empty space at the dinner table where a mother used to sit. Rayven Amuan Edwards is not remembered for the way she died. She is remembered for the way she lived, quietly, stubbornly, lovingly, in the middle of circumstances that would have broken most people down completely. She showed up for her children when her body was failing her. She held her family together with soft hands and a voice that, by all accounts, never once rose in anger. She was 34 years old. She had a transplant she was waiting for. She had children who needed her. She had a life that deserved more time. And if her story does one thing, just one thing, let it be this. Let it remind someone watching right now that the danger is real, the pattern is real, and the person most likely to harm you is not a stranger. It is someone who once knew your address, had a key to your door, and told you they loved you. Take that seriously. Please. To Rayven's mother, Lucy, to her children, to everyone who loved her and is still carrying this, we see you. And we are so sorry. Rest easy, Rayven. I said what I said.